155, boxing's biggest names, boxing's biggest stories, boxing's biggest fights, boxing's greatest memories and moments. All of that will be encompassed on this program as we pay tribute to a gentleman who just passed away a few days ago as we tape here on Tuesday, March the 25th. Big George Foreman is up hanging out now, hopefully with Muhammad Ali and a whole bunch, and Joe Frazier and a whole bunch of others up there, I hope. He passed away, and what we've decided to do and what we are going to do as a tribute to Big George Foreman, we will hear from Big George Foreman and yours truly, an interview I conducted less than 2 years ago when the movie came out, Big George Foreman. You'll hear that interview in its entirety. And we'll also hear from somebody that actually stepped inside the squared circle with Big George Foreman, won't we, Lee Groves?
We will, and that man is Gerry Cooney. And the fight only lasted 2 rounds, but boy, George looked so good. And Gerry looked good cosmetically,
yes,
and he fought a very good first round. So it'll be great to hear Gerry's opinions of George the fighter and George the man.
But we also, unfortunately, as it seems to go in threes, we had a few more that boxing people that were iconic in the sport for different ways. Talk about them as we set that up.
Yeah, on the same day that George passed away, iconic British writer Colin Hart, a Hall of Famer, he passed away just short of his 90th birthday. And also former lightweight champion Livingstone Bramble died right around that period as well. So in that vein, we are going to pay tribute to them as well.
Yeah, and we'll hear an interview that I did with Colin when he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. I believe that was in 2013 there
Correct.
in Canastota. But before we get to all of that, oh, and by the way, there is in our memories and moments, we should tease it. We're going to do something pretty cool. Explain.
We are. George Foreman was an all-time great. And with all all-time greats, we always like to play the game of who would beat who in a fight, and Smitty and I have selected 10 prominent heavyweights from the past and some from the present that we are going to match up with Big George, whether it be young George or old George or just George George.
Yeah, yeah. There were more than one Big George Foremans, and both of them either were amazing. But before we get to that, we'll talk about what took place at Mandalay Bay this past Saturday, and I'll let you lead us into all of that with some recaps.
Well, last Saturday in Las Vegas, Sebastian Fundora retained his WBC and WBO super welterweight titles for the first time with an impressive 4th-round TKO over Chordale Booker. This was his first fight since defeating Tim Tszyu 357 days ago. I watched the card on Amazon Prime, and from where I was watching, which happened to be the home office right here, it appeared that Fundora had finally found that sweet spot between fully utilizing his 80-inch reach and still being a crowd-pleasing fighter. And here's the statistical proof of that. Against Booker, he averaged 53 attempted jabs per round, and he landed 7.3 jabs per round, which is nearly double the jab numbers that he produced in his last 5 fights. Yet he was able to bloody Booker's nose, he kept him on the defensive, he scored a knockdown, and he finished the fight moments later. Now, Smitty, not only were you inside the arena, you were in the 3rd row. And from where you were sitting, were you impressed by what you saw?
Had to be, and thanks to my dear friend Samson Lukowitz, he is of course Fundora's manager and promoter. I don't know how Samson wears so many hats. Also involved with the Fundora's sister Gabriella, who's a world champion in her own right.
Undisputed.
I was really impressed with the precision, the power, and the patience of Sebastian, and everything was set off and set up by the jab. He really used his jab effectively, and why wouldn't he? He's 6'1,000. He's so tall and rangy, and but he's a guy and that's why he's a crowd pleaser. He likes to also fight on the inside, which has gotten him in trouble in the past. But he was really precise and again accurate with everything, and he knew when to turn up the tempo on the punches. He was patient in doing so, and really, I don't think he could have looked any better against that type of opponent in Booker, who's a decent fighter. Mm-hmm. So hats off to Sebastian, who really accounted himself well. I thought he looked really good.
And it appears that perhaps his next opponent, certainly his mandatory challenger, is Xander Zayas. And he's been making a lot of noise. He's undefeated. He's been on ESPN for many years. And that's going to be an interesting matchup. I do think that Fundora would win over Zayas just because of now all the versatility that he is showing. Zayas is going to have to do a completely different game in order to beat a guy like Fundora. We'll see if he can do it down the road. But as for the undercard fights that I previewed last week, Jesus Ramos scored the 7th-round TKO victory over late sub Guido Schramm that I thought would happen. And although Elijah Garcia scored a split decision over Terrell Gaucher, I thought that Garcia would win. In the fight, many thought that Gaucher should have won. So you kind of wonder about the future of Elijah Garcia. Yeah, he got the win, but there are things there that obviously have to be worked on there. And earlier in the day, DAZN streamed the card emanating from Australia. And while the main event saw George Kambosos win a 12-round decision over Jake Wiley, the big story took place on the co-feature when Skye Nicolson, heavy favorite, shockingly lost the WBC featherweight title by split decision to a mandatory challenger, Tiara Brown. Now, Brown's quite the story. She's 36 years old. She's a former Washington, D.C. police officer, and she's a native of Fort Myers, Florida, an area that you know very well. She was a very successful amateur. She won gold at the 2012 World Amateur Championships, but she turned pro after failing to make the 2012 and 2016 U.S. Olympic team. She couldn't make the trials, apparently. And in the 8 years since, she has toiled in relative obscurity, and she's had to take the long, hard road to the top. She fought all over the United States as well as in Colombia and Mexico and the Dominican Republic. But finally, after assembling a record of 18-0 with 11 knockouts, she got her shot at a world title. And she got her shot only because she was the #1 contender by the WBC. So Brown knew that it was a now or never proposition, especially since she was fighting an Australian in Australia in what was billed as Nicholson's homecoming. She pressured the champion all the way, and even the Australian commentators thought it was a very close fight. But in the end, Brown won the title by split decision. And when the words "and the new" were announced, she instantly fell to her knees and she let out all the emotions. When you consider that Brown had to work 23 years for this dream to come true, you can't help but feel happy for her. She worked hard, she did everything right, and now she's a world champion. Good for her, and congratulations.
And from Fort Myers, I actually moved here to Las Vegas from Fort Myers in, what was it? I can't even remember now, 1997. Congratulations to her. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll start getting into some of these tributes with, of course, Livingstone, Bramble, and Colin Hart, and later on, Big George Foreman. We'll be back. Back in this corner of the podcast, 155, with Lee Groves, the writer, author, historian, CompuBox counter, And Lee, take us into a couple of other sad stories, but certainly two people who really deserve to be acknowledged.
Really. It was just a few weeks ago that boxing lost Greg Haugen, but this past week saw three prominent boxing figures pass away. And we'll get to George Foreman later, but first we will honor the lives of former lightweight champion Livingstone Bramble, who died at age 64, and Hall of Fame writer Colin Hart, who passed away at age 89, reportedly from pancreatic cancer. Bramble was known for his two victories over Ray Boom Boom Mancini, and in those two fights, he showed incredible versatility by fighting equally well from both stances, and he showed excellent sharpness. And as a result of that sharpness, he sliced Mancini's face to ribbons in both matches. He won the first fight by 14th round TKO, and the rematch by a razor thin 15-round split decision. He then defeated mandatory challenger Tyrone Crawley by a 13th round TKO before losing the belt to Edwin Rosario by a shocking second round TKO. Or it was seen as a huge upset at the time because of how good Bramble was. In his nearly 23-year career, he assembled a record of 40 wins, 26 losses, and 3 draws with 25 knockouts. But at his best, he was very, very good in the ring and very, very bizarre outside of it. The man nicknamed Pitbull had a snake named Dog, a dog named Snake, and a ferret named Spider. And he controlled his weight by being a vegetarian. During my early years at the Hall of Fame, he was a fixture at the annual 5K run. And in contrast to the crazy Rastafarian image that he projected, especially during his world title days, he was great with the fans. He was a very nice man. What are your memories of Bramble?
Yeah, I believe I actually might have called one of his fights late in his career.
Mhm.
I didn't look to check on that. I interviewed him a lot of times, and I was a big fan of his. And I picked him to beat Mancini both times, by the way.
Okay.
One of the reasons I was such a big fan of his is he would come into the ring with what was one of my favorite songs by a Jamaican group, Rastafarian group, Third World. And the song was Sense of Purpose. Take a look and a listen.
Back in Reno, Tyrone Crawley, the challenger, in the ring and awaiting the appearance of Livingstone Bramble. And here he comes. 25 years old, a native of the Virgin Islands, now lives in Montclair, New Jersey. Livingstone Bramble, the second world champion from the Virgin Islands. The first, the one-time welterweight and middleweight champ, Emil Griffith.
So whenever I would interview Bramble, I would always bring that up, how much I loved the song. And he was a really good fighter. I think he had so many other interests and things that probably got in the way. I don't think he loved boxing. I don't think he loved it. I think he had a lot of interest in a lot of things, and because he didn't finish with the greatest record in the world, did he? But
No.
he was an excellent fighter and a really cool dude, and he was, the personification of sense of purpose. He had one, and it led him to world championship, and certainly a guy that needs to be remembered. I think a few weeks ago we even did something on that fight.
We did. It was when we had Bob Canobio on for the
Right.
40th anniversary of CompuBox, and the first fight that they did was the rematch between Bramble and Mancini, and the numbers got really good ride, and the rest is history. Bramble had a very nice run when he was at his best, and CompuBox is still going. So thank you, Livingston Bramble, for helping us out.
Yeah.
And as for Colin Hart, he was the preeminent boxing writer for The Sun in Great Britain for more than half a century. He covered 8 Olympic Games. He chronicled 4 different eras of boxing. And a couple of weeks ago, we recalled the legendary first fight between Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali. Well, Colin Hart covered that fight as well as countless others. Not only did he excel with the written word, he was also frequently on British television shows to offer his opinions about various things, and not just about boxing. It's interesting that Hart died on the same day as Foreman, and several tributes that I read detailed the following story. When Foreman was about to defend his heavyweight title against Ken Norton in Venezuela, he visited George Foreman at poolside. At the time, Hart was a chain smoker, and Foreman, ever the dedicated athlete, asked him to put out the cigarette. Hart, who described himself as an old-fashioned East Ender, would have none of it. He told George, "Say please." Only the intervention of publicist Bill Kaplan kept Hart from being slapped by Foreman right then and there. But later on, Foreman and Hart, they made amends and they became the best of friends. Now, as far as my personal connection to Hart, he and I were in New York to receive awards from the BWAA. I picked up the first of the two plaques. It's this one right here that you see behind me. While Colin won the Nat Fleischer Award for Excellence in Boxing Journalism. I heard his speech. I was in the room, and the speech was very, very gracious, but I never got to speak to him. 2 years later, he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, and it was there that you interviewed him, one of many that you did during that year. What do you remember about him, and what do you remember about the interview?
Well, I had known him quite a while anyway, covering all the fights here in Las Vegas. Colonel Bob Sheridan, the late great Colonel Bob, would always introduce me to all the people across the pond, like a guy like a Reg Gutteridge. Colonel would say, "You got to get these guys on your show." A Colin Hart, and so many. John Rawling became a dear friend. And I really liked Colin. He had a lot of spunk to him, and I think that's what he liked about me, because some of the old crusty writers that I would meet, didn't dig my persona, and he did. He got a kick out of me, and I got to interview him throughout the years. And then in 2013, when he was inducted, back then, that was before I was hosting, a few years before I started actually hosting, and I was in the tent. Remember, they would put me in this big tent where I would conduct all of my interviews, and he came by and, why don't we just play the interview? I also would go to the airport with him that year, and we spent about an hour or so waiting on the plane in mid-afternoon. I'm not sure whether we had a jar or not. We might have, knowing it was him and I'm not sure. But let's go to that interview of Colin Hart, Hall of Famer, really one of the great journalists in not just UK, in boxing history. Here's Colin Hart, and when we come back, gentleman Gerry Cooney joins us. We'll be back. Talk about excellence in broadcasting, excellence in writing, excellence in boxing. This gentleman now enshrined forever into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, the voice of boxing in the UK, Colin Hart. Colin, congratulations.
Thanks, Smitty.
How did you feel when you found out that you were going to be inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame?
Well, Ed Brophy called me about 6 months ago to tell me, and I'm in the word business, but I was speechless. And eventually I found a word to describe my emotion, and that word is ecstatic. That's how I felt.
What are the skills that make for a great boxing writer?
Let's say I got very good advice when I first started. And that was from a fellow sports writer, much older than me, who said, take a tip. He said, in your first year, eyes and ears open, mouth shut. In other words, listen to people, look and observe, and don't think you know it. That's what he was trying to, don't think you know it all, because you don't. And I had some wonderful mentors. Mickey Duff in Britain, Terry Lawless, a great British manager. When I came to this country, the first fight I covered here was 71, the Ali Frazier one at the Garden. Not bad for starters, was it, Smitty? Eddie Futch, Angelo Dundee. Those are the guys I listened to and I learned. And of course, I watched what was happening in sparring. Eventually, it rubs off on you. And you get to know, a bit about the business.
I got two options. Option one, I can accept defeat. Option two, I can get up, I can get tougher, I can get faster, I can get stronger, and then I go get mine. I made my choice, Have you made yours?
Back on In This Corner, the podcast, a $1.55. He is Lee Groves, and that gentleman there is a gentleman. He had a excellent career, 13 years as a pro, 28-3, 24 KOs, heavyweight championship challenger. He is Irish. And gentleman, Gerry Cooney. How you doing,
Nice.
Gerry?
You know what? I'm old and cranky, got a lot of problems. Got a half hour. I guess we're going to talk for about a half hour. No, everything is great. I'm so grateful, aside from Big George passing, but I got a lot of great things to say about that too. A lot of people feel sad, and it is sad, but it's also the life he lived.
Yeah.
Getting up there and winning that championship a second time, and having a beautiful family. I mean, being said, they were all George or Georgiana, but he was a great man.
Yeah, I want to talk about the first
The
time he would
determination.
come. The first time he would come across your radar. It's so interesting that you began your career. I think it was February the 15th, 77. In March of that same year, he was calling it a day on his first career, retiring after the Jimmy Young fight. So you're
Yes.
beginning your professional career. He's ending what was the first of his two careers. Back then, of course, but had you met him back then when you were making your pro debut?
No, I don't think so. Probably not, but I knew him. I really admired him in the Olympics.
Yeah.
When he was, he carried that flag around, and how proud he was to be an American and winning the gold medal. I mean, that's what America fights for. That's what we do.
Yeah.
And he was that guy, and devastating with power.
Oh.
He had all power.
Yeah.
And obviously we found out later on that you need more than power. And then the second time around, he figured that part out as well.
It's amazing how
One
he turned
thing-
himself around, not only as a fighter, but as a man. I mean, he really made changes to his. I've never seen an athlete, Gerry, make that kind of a switch. 10 years later, he comes back, and all of a sudden, he's a different dude, and he's able to carry his power into the later rounds. He would show that in winning the championship back at age 45. Have you ever seen an athlete be able to do such a metamorphosis like that?
Well, I mean, such an experience. I mean, the
Yeah.
only other guy I think about is the guy from Philly, Bernard Hopkins. What he did was amazing too, But, George Foreman, I remember him, the corner, he was way behind in the fight. And the corner said, listen, you got to do it this round. And he said, all right, I will. That was the determination he had, and the grit, and obviously, he'd done things like pulling buses up the hill and all these different things of training. He had some unorthodox ways of training, but listen, he carried it there. And my thought is, you know what? Yes, it's sad that George, we haven't seen him around for the last year. I think he's had some sort of illness over the last year, but he's done so much great things for the people, for life, for himself, for his family. Get that beautiful estate. He's done what everybody told him. Stop it, George. Stop it, George. George didn't do it. He kept going because he was determined. And when he knocked out Michael Mora, he knelt down in the corner and prayed to God, and he's got God in his corner right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's up there with Joe Frazier and so many others. You ended your career. Your last fight was against George. As I flip to Lee Groves, who has some great questions for you.
I can't remember.
Anyway, as someone who actually fought George Foreman, what
Yeah.
made him such a special fighter?
Determination. And listen, I had a company called Super Fights Inc., and we were putting on George's fights. When he was making that run, and he was always getting paid better than everybody else because they loved him. All the older guys wished they could be him.
Mhm.
And so they were following him. He's been mounting and building. And one day we're in some site where he's fighting, and he says, Gerry, why don't we fight? And I thought, I'd been sober. I put down the booze. Guys know on April 21st, I'll have 37 years of having had a drink. And I kind of ruined my career in that, not just the business of waiting and getting the right guy, but also I grew up with it, and the very thing I hated, I became. And so I got cleaned up, and I was excited about what I was doing. And George came to me, and I thought, I've never done this sober before. Why don't I take a shot? And the money was pretty good, and I got in shape. I probably came in too skinny for the fight, like I did with Holmes. When I fought Holmes, I came in at 225. I should have been 240 that night. It was so hot. But these are things that we don't learn only but by experience.
Yeah.
And George was a big puncher. Gil Clancy told me right. Gil Clancy said, stay outside, box him, box him, box him. But I hurt him in the first round. I hit him with a body shot and hit him on the chin. And when you're a puncher and that happens, you figure, let me take a shot at this guy, right? Big mistake.
Yeah.
And I listened to him on David Letterman's show, and David Letterman asked him, who was the most powerful puncher that ever hit you? And he said, Gerry Cooney. Well, I'm here to tell him in his passing that he was the heaviest guy that ever hit me too.
Yeah.
And
and
I
you
love
fought
George
you
Foreman.
fought well. You fought well. It didn't end well, but you fought well in that fight. Sorry, Lee, because I watched it again a couple of times yesterday, and you really were letting the hands go. You were almost Willie Peppish, letting your hands go and landing some hard shots, and you fought
James,
well.
And James and Lee, it's amazing what youth does to you. And when you get a little older, you get the experience, you understand what I really need to do. But at the time, you don't pay attention to that. You want to run with it. And obviously, Foreman was very, very dedicated to win that championship, and he caught me with that shot, and that's how it goes. And for me, I was able to turn the page and get on with my life. And let me tell you guys, I have a great life today. I have 3 great kids who's never seen me drink, and I was great friends with George Foreman. We talked on the phone. I don't know if I told you guys or Randy told you guys, but he came on our program on Sirius XM, and he said a nice little prayer for Muhammad Ali. And I was able to pass it back to him last night on our radio show about what a man he was. And he was kind of like a loner. He was a quiet man most of the time, I thought. But he was also had a good voice when he was on HBO. And we spoke to those people yesterday on HBO. And listen, you got to love him. What he did was amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Jerry, it's funny that Ali was the one. It's amazing because Ali introduced me to 2 different people when I was just a kid coming up. And Ali introduced me to Joe Louis, and Ali was the one that actually introduced me to George Foreman at a press conference they had down. And now, of course, Ali, Foreman, and Frazier reunited as I flip back to Lee.
Speaking of your fight with George said in the interview right after the fight that you hurt him with a left hook in the first round, and that he made a point of trying to hide his pain because he was afraid that if he showed it, that you would jump all over him and knock him out. Could you tell in the ring that you really buzzed him?
Well, I did notice when he went to the corner, he was kind of fell a little bit back, and he looked at me like to see if I was watching him, right? Because when you're a fighter, I'm looking at his expression to see where he's at. So I felt a little bit like I did hurt him, and I knew I hurt him with a body shot. And then, obviously what happens, his determination, I came in, he came in, he was fighting every 3 weeks, I was fighting every 5 years, and I got caught with a shot. And so, yes, I'm very proud of getting the chance to fight all those guys, Larry Holmes, Norton, all those guys in the ring, and especially George Foreman. And I learned a lot that night, and I learned that, I'm going to turn the page and really get on with my life. And I've been sober and clean for 37 years. I have a great family, a great life. I'm in the fight game. I go to mostly all the fights. And so I'm here to talk about it. I want to tell you guys something, and I want you to think about this. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I was thinking that guys in the gym, they box with 12, 14, 16-ounce gloves on. And all these guys are struggling with dementia. What about, I wear 24-ounce gloves when I train in the gym or if I spar, 24-ounce gloves. And then I was talking to my wife about it, and she said, you know what, Gerry, why don't they fight with a little bit bigger gloves in the ring? Like instead of 12 ounces, instead of 10 ounces, why don't we go to 14-ounce gloves? Why not?
Yeah.
Something. We got to help these guys because you know what? They're not being helped. They're ending up at the end of the road, not knowing who they are, where they're going, haven't got a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. And we need to start to make those changes. And I would love to champion that somehow. As a matter of fact, I'm going to call my guys from Title and have some conversations about that. And, listen, why not? We'll make better, longer fights.
Yeah. By the
14-ounce
way,
gloves.
Gerry, I only had a little 3-year, little short career. When I everything in my life is short. I know people out there are saying that, but I fought in 6-ounce gloves back in the 80s, and I think, by the way, some heavyweight championship fights in the 70s, Lee and Gerry, were 6-ounce gloves.
Well, maybe that's true, but
Yeah.
you don't want to be in there with me with no 6-ounce
No,
gloves
I don't.
on,
I
bro.
don't want to be in there with
No.
you in any of them. Not even
but
a
you
golf
understand,
club,
like,
because you know how to use a golf club. So
Now listen, if you look at,
Yeah.
I got a good swing. Watch yourself, bro. So if you look at this, right, you see all the football teams changing the equipment. They're not hitting as hard in training camp. All these sports, right? Soccer, people are getting hurt. We need to make a stand, but there's nobody, there's no federation, there's nothing to help these guys. And I think we need to start to look at that. Listen, they can fight longer, fight better with those experiences with heavier gloves on. I think it's so important for us to make a stand at some point. And then, of course, for me, is the officiating. I really feel like that if we didn't have those officials when I fought Foreman, I could have won that fight.
Lee, go ahead.
Well,
Come on, Lee, hit me, bro. Hit me, bro.
Well, you mentioned that George's greatest quality of a fighter was his determination.
Yep.
As someone who knew George and kept touch with him afterwards, what made him such a special man?
I think that George started out as a kid. He went over to he worked with that organization. I forget what it's called, for troubled kids, right? So he was an angry guy. Do you remember the organization I'm talking about?
Job Corps.
Job Corps, and that's an organization for troubled kids, and I think he got rid of some, but he was an angry guy, and then afterwards when he got a little bit older, he found humor in his life, and people picked up on it. Those one-liners, those two-liners that he had, and people fell in love with him, and it was a great experience. I want to tell you guys, when George Foreman was fighting Muhammad Ali, I said prayers. Please, God, Muhammad, do not get in the ring with that guy. Do not get in the ring with that guy. And that's the story. Muhammad Ali was that guy that figured you out. It was like we all go to a fight, and I tell the guys the story, and there's a knock on the door, and they say, okay, Cooney, you're next. And you walk down this empty corridor, and then they open the door to the arena, and you hear the roar of the crowd, and that's when the magic starts, and you figure everything out, right? And that's the game. And George didn't believe that this could happen to him, but he also was there. Everybody loved Ali, and they kind of shunned him a little bit when he was over there when they fought. And listen, big man, great family. James, you are a big man in this game, and Lee, you are fantastic. We have to keep reminding and letting people know what you guys do. It's not easy anymore, and we don't know what's going to happen over there with the Sheik and with this new company that's being built. Is it going to come out of America? What's the story? We don't know.
Yeah.
How long is it going to last? And they always say, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true, but we don't know that yet. When does the money run out? How do these other guys from here in America handle that kind of thing? We're going to have to find out, boxing, but we need to really start to protect these guys so when they get older, they can enjoy their family and friendships and travel the world and be able to, I love
to be on
people.
podcasts with us.
Yeah, that's right. And listen, I travel all over and I meet thousands and thousands of people, and I have such a great time both ways. And I think that we both leave better off from when we first got there. That's what we have to remember. These guys, most of these guys are bitter towards the game. They lost their money. They don't can't get along with their wife. They can't get a job. We need to make a change. And,
Yeah,
and I'll be love to hear from you guys.
I know Lee has a couple more questions, but you just made me think about something. Remember I said something to you, Lee, right
Just
before
now?
the you made me think of something that I said to Lee right before the show that I said I wouldn't say on the air, but I'm going to say it anyway. If it all ended right now, if boxing ended right now, and I still hosted the Hall of Fame and knew people like you and had the honor of having guys like you on my television show and this podcast, and the fact that I was with Ali and Frazier and all these people, for me, I would say I was part of something special that you were a part of. You're one of the last bastions of that era of the 70s and, part of the 80s and on, that were those great heavyweights. Not good heavyweights, great heavyweights. I know we got guys around today that are pretty damn good, but what was special about that Larry Holmes and Gerry Cooney and Ernie Shavers and Jimmy Young and Joe Frazier and George Foreman and, of course, Muhammad Ali? And, what was it about you all in that time, in that era, and the heavyweights that will live on forever? What was it? And you were part of it.
It was just a great bunch of guys with personality. And I'm going to tell you something. I had two managers I wish I didn't have. I had Don King, who kept me out when I needed 3 or 4 or 5 more fights before I fought Holmes. And I thought I really was resentful about that for so many years. And my manager wanted the big money, right? But when I look back on it now, thank God I never got those fights, because I could be struggling too.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And
Real
so,
good point.
yeah, that was a great time in boxing and in life. And I love every minute of it. I really, I was with Mitch Green a couple of days ago. I love him. He fought with his heart, and he's struggling today, as many other guys are that I communicate with. And I love them, and we need to have some answers for those guys.
I can tell you
I hope
feel
that-
like you're speaking for them. I can tell.
I am.
Yeah.
It needs to be done.
Yeah.
We need to stand up. And I often thought about if these sanctioning bodies took $1 from every fight, every ticket that goes on, in a couple of years, they could go to college, they could go to the doctors and get themselves straightened out. That being said, I know I keep drifting a little bit, but I'm going to tell you, like you guys feel, I love George Foreman, even though he beat me in that fight. And he was a smart guy, dedicated, and he did so many great things for people. And I got to meet him and his kids, and we miss him. We're going to miss him. He's going to be talked about forever. He's one of the guys that's going to be talked about forever, and rightly so.
And so will our guest Gerry Cooney. Lee, I know you got a couple of more questions.
Actually, I have one more.
Okay.
And,
One.
Now that George has gone over to the other side, how will you remember him?
I remember I keep saying this to you guys, his dedication, his determination, his will to fight, to prove a point. He believed in God. When he lost to Jimmy Young, he said he saw God that night, right? And I think that he came back 10 years later and thought, wow. I remember him trying to get Tyson in the ring. And listen, he got in there with Holyfield. It was real deal.
Yeah.
I mean, he fought everybody. And so I remember George Foreman is, I would love to have a dad like that who could have showed me that grit, and that whatever it was I wanted to do and be, I can do it. And that's what America needs now. And he gave that. He sent that out. He talked that way. And I admire that so much.
Yeah. Well said. One of the things, by the way, when we did our sit down with Gerry Cooney, that's on the show In This Corner, I'm going to share some of that in a future show when we have Gerry on more to talk about his life and career. By the way, we weren't able to do the in-ring. I was ready. I was prepared. Somehow Gerry had an excuse. I don't know. He had to play some golf. Now many but
Listen,
anyway,
Go ahead.
I think I want to talk about, though, because you, of course, do a great job with Randy Gordon at the fights on Sirius XM every Monday. I think it's on at 3 p.m. You guys do a great job. But breaking down George as a fighter, two different careers, the first career and then the second career. But I personally, when I put it all together, I honestly think that he's on the shortest of short list of the greatest heavyweight champions ever. He seldom got hurt in a fight. If he did, like he did against you, he covered it well. It was a massive puncher. His cross-arm defense was so tough to get through. Breaking him down as a pugilist, what did he do there? It wasn't just the punching power. He threw a lot of unorthodox shots too, right, Gerry?
Well, yes, he did. I'm not going to tell you anything to belittle this moment for George Foreman, but there was a guy that wanted Foreman so bad. He's the guy that I fought, Larry Holmes. And I think that style of fighter in those days, he could handle a George Foreman unless he got caught with shots. But, those kind of guys like an Ali, if you just move and move and move and stay disciplined. And like Clancy told me, don't get in a slug fight. Move for 8 or 10 rounds. But I don't want nobody chasing me down. I want to catch him, and that's what happened. So, you know what I mean? So those kind of guys give anybody trouble.
Yeah.
Those guys that move and stick and jab and hold on and move. But that being said, listen, they talked about his fights, the guys he fought. They weren't the top caliber guys until the end, but he still got there and he still did it.
Yeah.
And every guy 50 years and older wanted to be George Foreman.
Mm-hmm. Where do you rank him in the pantheon of the great heavyweights of all time? I know it's tough, but where do you put him?
Yeah, I would say in 6.
Yeah.
Lennox Lewis, Holmes, Muhammad Ali. You got a bunch of great guys. In that division. I know we have broken it down, Randy and I, and at the fights. And listen, he's up there in the top 5, top 6, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have I have so much more respect. We told this story on the show last week. I ended up spending so much time with Ali as a little boy as he prepared for the first Frazier fight. And then I end up, by the grace of God, doing the final interview on television Joe Frazier ever did. And I ended up with tremendous respect for Smokin' Joe Frazier. And, of course, tremendous respect for a guy like you. Now, we better see you in Canastota in June as your little buddy, Randy Gordon, will be immortalized.
I'm going to be there. But you bet I'm going to be there. I'm very excited to see the inductees this year, take the rides around in those beautiful cars, and have a great weekend with my peeps. And you guys are part of that.
Yeah. Well, wait a minute. So should I bring my fight attire? Could there possibly be the long-awaited Cooney-Smitty matchup? Never mind, ladies and gentlemen. I've decided that I'm going to come up with an injury there.
Okay. Okay. I'll make you look good for 3 rounds, Smitty.
Yeah. Hey, listen, my weakness was shots to the body, and there is nobody in boxing who hit harder to the body than that man right there.
But listen, and in the game, what we really missed out on is cutting that ring down from 20 to 10 to 5. And the guys follow each other. See, the great trainers have passed on, and they're not giving that information out. We need to cut the real estate down. If I get backed up 2 feet, I got to get 3 feet back, right?
Yeah.
Just keep that in the back of your mind, Smitty.
I'm thinking about it. I'm looking for space, baby. Listen, we know you've got stuff to do, and we know it was tough for you to deal with, but I love the way you handle the passing of Big George Foreman. Any final words on him for the audience out there?
There's never going to be another George Foreman. And he was a sweet man. If we asked him to come on our show, he always came on. He was so busy, with people calling him. You know how it gets when you're like that. Everybody wants to call you just this one time, and it doesn't work. He always showed up for boxing. And he always had great things to say. And so for that, I love George Foreman.
We love Gerry Cooney and hope that he's going to be around a long, long time. I can't wait to see you in June. I'm really excited about it. Remember, folks, at the fights on Sirius XM. Why do
156.
I always want to call it FM? XM, and
Got
that's
really good sound.
yeah, that's okay. With our buddy Randy Gordon, who I can't wait to see in June. We're going to come back from the break, and we're going to hear my interview, the final interview I did with Big George Foreman.
Great.
Thanks to Gerry Cooney. We'll be back. Back on In This Corner, the podcast. I think we're at 155. Wow, that was good stuff with Gentleman Gerry, Irish Gerry, Gerry Cooney. Good stuff. You can see how much George Foreman means to Gerry, and that was Gerry's final fight of his career. And maybe it was good that, Gerry called it a day then. Because he's able to do and speak so eloquently now and so passionately now. And now we need to do that about George Foreman. So you sort of kind of prepared these last two segments, so I'll let you begin it.
Well, not long after hearing about George's death, I said this of him on X, quote, "What a life this man lived in his 76 years. Olympic gold medalist, two-time heavyweight champion, pastor, author, broadcaster, entrepreneur, Hall of Famer, father, grandfather, and cultural icon worthy of a biopic. This once surly man died as a beloved figure," end quote. Few people have ever successfully executed a complete 180 in their persona, and even fewer were able to complete the 180 from bad to good. We've seen the 180 from good to bad, Bill Cosby, O.J. Simpson being two of them, but not what George did. It's so hard to flip the script once it's written. And once you make a negative impression, for him to come back all those years later and become a different man, and a man that everybody wanted to listen to and to see fight and to listen to talk. He sold grills and became a multi-millionaire because of it. Yeah. It really is astonishing what he was able to do in life and what he was able to do in the ring. 20 years between championship reigns. That's the longest in boxing history. And I don't think that that's a record that's going to be broken. I had only a couple of personal interactions with George. One was indirect and one was direct. I remember the night that George regained the title with Michael Moore. I was working at the Parkersburg News. We were ready to put out the Sunday morning paper. And I was looking at the wires for stories. And when I got to the sports wire, I started to see a series of AP alerts from the boxing wire. And I thought, wait a minute, George Foreman is fighting Michael Moore tonight. And there would not be any AP alerts if Michael Moore had won this fight. And then I realized, my God, George Foreman did it. And I couldn't wait to get home to my VCR and watch the fight and see what happened. I purposely didn't want to.
It happened.
It happened. My God. And it was such a wonderful thing to see this man go through 20 years of what he went through. He came back 10 years later, built up his career, lost to Holyfield the first time around, gets a second shot at Michael Moore at age 45. And not only does he become the oldest heavyweight champion in history, he did it by 8 years because Jersey Joe Walcott was 37 when he turned the trick. It was just a wonderful boxing career, a wonderful life, and he followed it through all the way to the end. What a man he was.
I'm going to come back to you with some of your stats, unless you want to save that for the last segment. I think we should do it in this. But let me.
I can do it.
George Foreman first came into my radar. Obviously, I'm a kid growing up in Miami, and I was hanging around this guy that would certainly come into play into George Foreman's life and career, that guy being Muhammad Ali. It was Ali that introduced me to George Foreman. It was some kind of a press conference going on. I forgot. And then later on, when Foreman would come back, one of his fights, I know you looked it up for me, was I think at the Lee Civic Center, one of his comeback fights.
Right.
And he came in studio and sat down with me with a guy named, what's his name? Archie Moore. And they both sat down, and I talked to George. Then, and you know, to me, I've always said that it is, to me, I know there's Ben Hogan and other Tiger Woods, but no, man, this is the fight business. For him to be able to come back 10 years later, win the title 20 years from when he did it, I think it was, and then to the metamorphosis of style. Yeah. He was known not only style in personality that would completely change, but to transcend it into boxing and to be able to, instead of get tired and be worn out after 3 or 4, he was able to go the distance. He just changed. And for people who don't believe in spirituality and God or Jesus or whatever, see George Foreman, because this man made a complete 380 and changed himself. And I don't think he could have come back and won the world title had he not changed his style in life and in boxing. And it was amazing. It was just amazing the way he was able to do it. And then the way he did it with, you're going to point to some stats about George Foreman. One thing about both George, first career, second career, that he did that you fighters today need to listen to is called activity. Talk about some of that.
Well, anyway, when he turned pro after winning the gold in 1968 Olympics, he fought 13 times in 1969, and he started that year on June 29th. So he fought 13 times in less than 6 months. Then he fought 12 more times in 1970, 7 in 1971, and 5 in 1972, leading up to the Frazier fight. And then when he started his comeback in 1987, he was very smart about how he did it, because he treated himself like a prospect. Just happened to be a 37-year-old, 267-pound prospect, but he started small. And when he started the comeback in 87, he fought 5 times. And then he fought 9 times in 1988, 5 times in 1989, and 5 more times in 1990, leading up to the Holyfield fight in 1991. He stayed active. He got himself in better shape as he went along. He got the game back. And he, as you said, he changed his game from first career to second career. And I have some stats that illustrate that. Now, CompuBox did 8 retro counts of George's previous fights. In those fights, he averaged 58 punches thrown per round. That's above the 44 heavyweight average. He was also very accurate. He landed 37% of his total shots, 27% of his jabs, and 45% of his power shots. Those are really good numbers. And he landed 7 jabs per round. That's really good. And his punch distribution. Now, George Foreman was an animal when he was younger. So as you might expect, he threw 37 power shots per round and 21 jabs per round. More power shots than jabs. That makes sense. But then we did 10 fights of old George. And old George threw fewer punches per round, 43. That's right about the heavyweight average. But he was even more accurate. 53% overall, 56% jabs, 51% power. That's astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. It's almost unheard of for a fighter to be able to get 50% in all 3 phases. And He averaged 12 and a half landed jabs per round. That's astonishing as well. 10 is exceptional. 13? That's just off the charts. And here's the punch distribution. Remember, as a young man, he threw more power shots than jabs. Here, he threw 23 jabs per round and 20 power shots per round. He completely changed his game to a jab-oriented game.
Yeah.
And that is astonishing.
And you know, he was jab heavy and had a heavy jab. Also, you know, had the cross guard that he would use that really made him with those tree trunks for arms, made it so difficult to hit him. There wasn't anything to really hit. You know, Archie Moore, I'm certain, and Sadler, Dick Sadler, I think helped him with that. He was so difficult to hit, so unorthodox, had one of the great uppercuts in the history of boxing where he just suddenly, we could have asked Gerry Cooney about that. Those uppercuts were just devastating. He was smart, very cagey. I was at the Holyfield fight in Atlantic City, and I remember I forgot that I also had him on radio a few times, and I think I give credit to, who was it? Jay Edson. I remember Jay Edson, who used to work with Top Rank, and Jay was the one who got him on my radio show a few times, probably before that fight with Holyfield, where, by the way, he demonstrated a pretty damn good chin in that fight with Evander Holyfield. He took, something like 20 unanswered punches or something.
It was amazing.
And so he was as great a puncher as anybody ever, took a great punch, had good defense, and his second part of his career would come back and have stamina to be able to knock out a guy like Michael Moore in round number 10. Just remarkable. Greatest comeback story in all of sports. We could go on and on and on about it. I had the opportunity a few years ago when his movie came out, Big George Foreman, to chat with George. And I think we'll play this interview in its entirety, going to the break. I haven't even watched it to see exactly what it was. Obviously, some of it's going to be about the movie, but the movie was about his life, so I think it is apropos. And then when we come back, we're going to have a very interesting segment where you're going to ask me questions, and we're going to talk about George Foreman against 10 of the greatest heavyweight champions of all time, head-to-head. But first, here's yours truly in the final interview I ever did with Big George Foreman less than 2 years ago. Back on In This Corner, the podcast with former two-time heavyweight champion of the world, former Olympic gold medalist, Big George Foreman. The movie is available April the 28th in theaters near you. George, your remarkable career spanned nearly 30 years, 28 years as a professional. What did you most take out of the sport of boxing? What really did you mainly get from boxing?
Truly, I learned how to fight. I didn't realize that the greatest fights I'd ever have would be outside the ring. I've had to get up so many times, brush my pants off, spit in my palms, and say, I'm going one more round. And that's just in life. Forget about boxing. Boxing taught me how to get up.
You know, when I think about your career, I looked at something today on my Facebook. I opened up a memory, and I was congratulating Tiger Woods for 4 years ago on this day as we do the interview. He won the Masters, and a lot of people thought that might be the greatest accomplishment in the history of sports. But I said no then, and I say no now, and I'll probably always say no. What you did was not only improbable, pretty much impossible, but like Jim Lampley said, he did it. To come back in boxing and to basically have a metamorphosis of not only your personal life, but your career, and then be able to win a championship back 20 years later, when you look upon it now, what do you realize how remarkable that was?
What a remarkable feat, because you win the boxing match, that's one thing, but all of that training and sparring. I'd go into the gym and have to work out with these young guys. Here I am, a man over 40 years old, and no one in the gym is above 20, 21, 22. I had to struggle with these kids every day. I'll never forget that. Winning is one thing, but the training it took to do it, I'll never forget that.
Just going to say some names, and please give a quick response. And we'll start out with the name Sonny Liston.
Oh, I trained with Sonny Liston. We were stablemates, and people would walk by and say hello, and he just looked right through them. And I remember thinking, that's the way I'm going to be. Never forget Sonny Liston.
Could your career have gone that way like a Liston had you not found God and changed it? Could you have had that type of a situation rather than the affable, lovable guy that we know now?
Sonny Liston saw me a few times trying to imitate him, and he actually would touch me on the shoulder and say, "Ease up, man, ease up." I became worse than Sonny Liston, but it was good that I found him in my life because he kind of inspired me that all that old hate and toughness is not going to do anything, but finding faith in God really changed me. I found out the greatest invention of all time were human beings, and I'd have to learn to be kind to them.
I was lucky enough to have the great Muhammad Ali actually introduce me to you in Miami way back in, I think it was 73 or 4 when the fight was announced. Got to meet Joe Louis that same day, too. Quickly on Muhammad Ali and then Joe Frazier, who I did the final interview with before he passed away.
Oh. Yeah, I loved, I really hated Muhammad Ali for a long time because of ignorance. Someone take your title from you like that and keep running their mouths afterwards. But then once I found my true faith and my religion, I learned to love Muhammad Ali. I realized I had lost a lot of years of friendship with one of the greatest persons I'd ever met. And to his last day, we exchanged friendship and greetings and love with one another. And I still miss him, by the way. Joe Frazier, you see him, there was only one Joe Frazier. He didn't put on any airs. What you see is what you get. What a wonderful man.
I was lucky enough to know Doc Brodus, spent some time with him here where I live in Vegas towards the end. Talk about Doc Brodus and what he meant to you, George.
Doc Brodus, the first human being that I saw that never gave up on me. I didn't want to be a boxer. Doc Brodus' vision was for me to be a boxer. I hid from him. He found me in Houston hiding again, sent me a plane ticket back to California, and got me right back into road work and training. That man believed in me, and Forrest Whitaker did a great job of portraying Doc Brodus. He did. Doc Brodus, forever, long live Doc Brodus.
And, in that fight with Moore, could the George Foreman of 74 have had the stamina to do what you did to Moore in round 10 and 94?
You have to have stamina. You have to have a lot of people. You got to fight for more than just a championship of the world. You got to have people that you fight for, not just yourself. I had to get in that ring and remember all the kids who believed in me, my dear wife who was praying for me. That gave me stamina more than the training and the gym work. I didn't have that beforehand. I never could have had that kind of endurance beforehand.
How does George Foreman want to be remembered as a fighter, but more importantly, how does George Foreman want to be remembered as a man?
It's a wonderful thing to live, and I've met so many great men in my life, the great Johnny Unitas, even Muhammad Ali and Joe Louis, Joe Frazier. I just want to have my name called with them one day. That's about enough.
Life after boxing, you've done well with it, but there are a lot of fighters today, and I won't name the names. They're all friends of mine. Some of them are hanging around a little bit too long. I know you made it work, George, but you were special. A little word of wisdom to fighters who might be hanging around too long and need to go appreciate life.
Well, I learned from boxing, I learned early on, if you learn to sail, you'll never starve. I had to leave boxing, and for a long time, I didn't know what to do, but it was happy I had my ministry, and I learned to sail from one thing to another to the George Foreman grill. I sold, and life became more important to me than just a boxing match.
He's one of the great heavyweight champions of all time, Big George Foreman. Make sure you check out Big George Foreman in theaters April the 28th. Thank you, George.
Thank you. Thank you.
I got two options. Option one, I can accept defeat. Option two, I can get up. I can get tougher. I can get faster. I can get stronger. And then I go get mine. I made my choice. Have you made yours?
Back in this corner of the podcast, 155. I'm enjoying this one, even though it's somewhat sad. We're talking about the departure from at least this world to that world. George Foreman passing away the other day. We also spoke and had some tributes to Colin Hart, the brilliant journalist from the UK, and Livingstone, Bramble, a former world champion. Right now, I'm going to take a little break and talk about Dr. Nam.
Fun.
Yeah, there you go. He specializes in full mouth cosmetic veneers, crowns, dental implants. Implants, his specialty, man. He is amazing at it because it can be, as we've said on past shows, rather complicated, especially if you've had an implant that failed and then you still want to get it. They can go in there and build up the bone and then put it in, and it's the next best thing, if not almost as good as your own teeth. And he does a great job. And he not only does a great job while he's working on your mouth in setting it up with the financial end of it. That can be really difficult because that's what pushes a lot of people away from implants and dental work in general. Not only is it not fun to be under there getting all that work done, but the financial responsibilities can be very, very difficult. And he has some really flexible financial options for you if you are in need of dental implant type of work. I would highly recommend you give Dr. Namfan a call. His number, 702-637-9168. That's 702-637-9168. He's located in Vegas. He's located in New York. He's located, has offices in New Jersey as well. Again, Dr. Nam Phan, 702-637-9168. We're gonna do something quite interesting here now. But before we did, I know you had a personal story with George also that you wanted to share with our audience.
Yeah, I only got to meet George once, and that was on the morning of his induction into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. Usually they take the inductees inside the museum, take them around, show them their plaque, take pictures with it, and so on and so forth. And there was a line of people waiting for George to come out, and I was one of them. And I had this big book where I got like 400 different autographs that I've taken with me for a number of years, and I wanted to get George's signature. But the thing was, a friend of mine told me that George Foreman would not sign a picture of him hitting another boxer because that was sort of a sign of his metamorphosis as a fighter. And so I found a page, and there was several shots of George. And when George came out, I presented the book in front of him, and he looked and he goes, And then he saw a picture of him just staring at Joe Frazier instead of hitting him. And he said, yes, I'll sign that. So he put his signature on there. He moved on. And that was pretty much it. That was my brush with greatness.
Yeah, but you know what? That makes me think. Because you know one of the things that drives me crazy, and like we spoke about it last week about, like, for example, Conor Benn and Eubank, you know, all the bullshit that goes on leading up to these fights and the stupid, silly, sophomoric, asinine, press conferences and weigh-ins. Look, none of these guys in boxing today were as devastating as George Foreman. And yes, he could be a bit surly, but when did you ever see him act like a complete jerk, though? When did he ever act like a complete asshole? Like every fighter, we got a punk like Ryan Garcia acting like a tough guy, or any of these. Not just Ryan. There's a lot of them. I mentioned Eubank and Ben and these guys that are, little midgets like me that, yes, they can fight, but all the antics. When did there was nobody more menacing than George Foreman, but he didn't act like that.
No, he didn't. And that was even the old George. Yes, he could be surly. He could be confrontational. He might want to slap reporters like Colin Hart, and all that. But we never saw the histrionics of today. And then, of course, we had George 2.0, who is as gentle and as funny. His size alone, his presence alone, his reputation alone was enough to communicate. I am not a man to mess with. Don't take my niceness for weakness. And fighters behaved accordingly. And I think a lot of fighters today could take a page out of George Foreman's book as far as how they comport themselves.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I know you've prepared this segment. I'm looking forward to it. So set it up and let's do it.
Okay, so as we said at the beginning of the show, this segment is going to be devoted, like we said, when we talk about great fighters, we like to match them up against the greatest of all time, mythical matchups, fantasy matchups, and stuff like that. Well, we picked out 10 great heavyweight champions of the past, and let's match up George to see how he would do. And I'm going to go in chronological order. I did leave out guys like Jack Dempsey and Gene Tunney because they were simply too small, too light. But we'll start with Joe Louis, regarded as the greatest heavyweight champion of all time for a sizable amount of people, not named Muhammad Ali. How would George Foreman do against a prime Joe Louis?
Yeah, just again, right at that line of demarcation of being too small. He just wasn't big enough to deal. And I know Louis knocked out some big guys, but none of them were massive like George Foreman and would be able to have the defense that Foreman had. So he knocks out Joe Louis.
He probably does, but Joe Louis had state of the art. He was state of the art even now with his technique. But George Foreman was always bothered by guys who moved. Jimmy Young beat him. Muhammad Ali beat him. And it would be that type of fighter. Joe Louis had good footwork, but he was not a mover.
No.
And against the strength of George Foreman, he would have problems. Let's move on to a guy who was a mentor of George Foreman, and he actually mentioned this as the man who taught him to be surly as a heavyweight champion, and that was Sonny Liston. He sparred with Sonny Liston and learned from Sonny Liston. But how would he do against Sonny Liston?
Sonny Liston was there to be hit. He didn't have great feet either. He could punch, but George could punch better. He knocks out Sonny Liston.
Yeah, the only thing is that, the young George Foreman had a lot of respect for Sonny Liston. I don't know whether he would be psychologically... Well,
putting that aside,
yes, George Foreman was a bigger, stronger, heavier hitting version of Sonny Liston, and he showed in his second career that he had a tremendous teeth rattling jab himself, and that was one of Sonny's biggest weapons as well. So yeah, I would pick George Foreman to beat Sonny Liston as well. Next up, the Easton Assassin, Larry Holmes. How do you see that one?
I like Gerry Cooney, I think, and of course they almost fought in the, what were they going to call it, the Geezers at Caesars or something like that?
Correct. Yeah.
I would lean towards Larry Holmes being able to beat both versions, but one of those I could see, Larry succumbing and being stopped by Foreman, but I think Larry would give George both the early George fits and the latter one he certainly would have beaten. So I would say that would be a fight I would lean towards Larry.
I would as well, for the same reasons that you say. Larry Holmes was a great fighter,
yeah,
and he had the best jab in history. George is close, but
they were
Larry
different kinds of jabs.
Very, very much so. Then we move on to Iron Mike Tyson. How do you see that one?
We already saw it twice in the frame of Joe Frazier. And Joe had more stamina than Mike Tyson. He didn't have as fast a hands, but it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, he would have just he would have destroyed Mike Tyson.
Mike Tyson was, as you would say, of any fantasy matchup involving him. Mike Tyson was most dangerous in the first 3 rounds. He had that hand speed, that head movement. He had very, very quick hands. He had power in both hands. He would be a problem in the first few rounds. But then again, George Foreman was a fast starter himself, and he was very, very accurate himself. Size does matter. Strength does matter. Whale of a fight. I can't see that fight going the distance at all. I would say that Foreman would beat Tyson. It wouldn't be easy. And of course, they were talking about having Tyson and Foreman meet when Foreman was George 2.0. And you would think that at those points of their careers, I think Mike Tyson would be favored because he was younger and George was more easily hit.
We're just talking about at their best.
At their very best, I would favor Foreman.
He walks right through him. You're making it a tougher. The uppercuts and the stuff that Tyson did would not work against that cross arm style, and George would just sit. And we like Mike, but Foreman destroys him.
And moving on to one of Mike Tyson's peers, at least chronologically, Lennox Lewis.
Now that is one, the Lennox that, once Emmanuel came in and got that chin out of the way and made him use his legs and his range, I could see Lennox Lewis giving him fits. I could see Lennox Lewis winning a decision. I think the early George, I know I'm going against what I just said, but the first George Foreman, if he were to hit Lennox at any point in Lennox's career, Lennox is gone. But the best of Lennox Lewis against the best of George is it's almost a 50-50 fight, and I could see Lennox winning it.
I feel the same way. Lennox Lewis does have gifts that could trouble George. He wasn't a mover, but he had a very good jab, and he was very, very smart. He was a chess player. He could think moves ahead. Very intelligent. If it were the earlier pre-Manuel Stewart Lewis, George Foreman beats that Lennox Lewis. But you're right. Once Emmanuel smoothed out the rough edges and made him more of a defensive-oriented fighter, a very careful and analytical fighter, I could see Lennox Lewis beating Foreman. I could also see Foreman beating Lennox Lewis because he has that power. That power comes from nowhere. Now let's move on to Vladimir Klitschko. Vladimir Klitschko.
Happy birthday, champion. Vladimir. Happy birthday. It's his birthday as we tape this. I think Vladimir fighting at his best could create a lot of problems for Foreman. But Vladimir didn't have the greatest whiskers in the world. And although, once again, Emmanuel, the late, great Emmanuel Stewart, made him better by making him longer and pulling that chin away, that's another one that I could see going either way. But because of the chin of Vlad and the power of Foreman, I lean Foreman.
Agreed. Vladimir Klitschko is a very gifted fighter like Lennox Lewis. He was a chess player. He's very intelligent, had a very good left jab, had a trip hammer right hand. He could hurt anybody with that right hand. George Foreman would apply pressure. He would make Vladimir very uncomfortable, and an uncomfortable Vladimir Klitschko is a vulnerable Vladimir Klitschko. So I could see Foreman it'll be an edge of your seat thing. You could see Vladimir outboxing him for the first 6 or 7 rounds, but then, George could hang that one big bomb on him and everything could change. Let's go to his older brother, Vitaly Klitschko. What do you think of that one?
Vitaly, a cagey fighter, again had the size to deal with Foreman. I think he had a better chin than Vlad, and I could see. I mean, I can't pick him. I can't pick Vitaly to beat George Foreman, but it wouldn't surprise me if he could, use his cerebral faculties and his size as well, and win that fight and eke out that fight. So that's one that, I'm not given to vacillation, ambiguity, or ambivalence, but I could see that one that is almost, because of style, a 50-50 fight.
I think it depends on whether Vitaly Klitschko could keep Foreman at long range. He was a volume puncher. He had that sort of jab that's out there all the time. He has deceptively fast hands. He's very tough individual, very smart like Vladimir, but a very tough individual with a very good chin. If any chin can absorb George Foreman's bombs, it's Vitaly Klitschko's chin.
And remember, these guys, they don't see that cross arm, that cross arm style. And when they're tree trunks in front, it cuts away the jab, it cuts away uppercuts, and George knew how to throw off of it. So I know I'm getting technical, but it makes a hell of a difference, So okay, we move on to
Anthony Joshua.
Foreman. It's over. That, in fact, for as long as it took you to answer that question, that fight, he walks right in and just annihilates, AJ. No contest.
I agree as well. But here's an interesting matchup. Tyson Fury, 6'9", 85-inch reach, can fight both ways, quick twitch. He could pose problems for George.
Yeah, I think he poses problems for anybody. He really would. But at the end of the day, he's not going to be on his bicycle. He can do that, but he's so used to being able to bully people and fight on the inside that would be his demise. I think Foreman knocks him out.
I agree. It'll take time. It'll take time to figure him out. But George just has that tremendous, tremendous power. And finally, the champ, Alexander Usyk.
Ooh. This is going to make people say, like, what is Smitty talking about? Usyk gives him fits because he can move. He's not going to be there to be hit. He's a bigger, larger Jimmy Young in many ways. Great defense, great offense, but he could punch probably better than Jimmy Young. And he's not a little guy, even though he came from. No. He's a bigger guy, and he can match up. He'd give him fits. So I could see I could see Usyk winning that fight. I remember Tommy Morrison was able to outbox George. If you stay, and Cooney said this, what do you got to stay? Totally disciplined when you fight George. You can't have any hiccups. And I think a guy that could not have those hiccups is Usyk.
Yeah, I agree. Everybody thinks of Alexander Usyk as a small heavyweight. And in this era, he's not the biggest guy. He's not the strongest guy. But he's very quick. He's very smart. He knows how to use angles. And he's a left-hander. And he stands, 6'4"? He's about 220 pounds. That's about what George Foreman was, right? Yeah. So it's not a hulking guy beating up on a smaller guy. These are guys that are relatively equal anatomically. Stylistically, totally different. Yeah. Alexander Usyk is a technical guy. He's very intelligent. And he's also humble enough to score points. He's not going to go for a knockout against
exactly.
George. He's just going to pick
there you go.
And poke, and he's going to win on points.
Yeah, it's amazing that's what makes this sport so fantastic at its highest levels. It seems like a cliche, and it is a cliche, but it's a factual cliche. Styles make fights. And if you happen to be able to, that's why I've thought so much of Crawford in recent times, because he can fight more than one way and still be remarkable, and from both sides, which is why he's so difficult to beat and hasn't been beaten yet. But yeah, great stuff there. I mean, what it really shows is just the greatness of the man we lost, Big George Foreman, a remarkable career in boxing, waving the flag, the Olympics, destroying. Down goes Frazier. And then, of course, the fight in Zaire with Muhammad Ali, and then retirement, and then coming back 10 years later, and then 20 years later, since he won it, he wins it again. It happened against Michael Moore here in Las Vegas down the street. A remarkable career, but even a more remarkable life, in my opinion, even from naming all the kids the way he did, George. And, I think Frida Foreman, I think his daughter fought, because I think I did some of her fights, I believe.
I have.
Just a remarkable boxing career, a remarkable life after boxing, with the grill and everything, and just a remarkable man. And I'm glad we've gone into overtime again, but it's worth it when you do it for somebody like Big George Foreman. We want to thank Gerry Cooney for being with us. Thank you, Gerry. Also, rest in peace to Livingstone Bramble and my pal Colin Hart. And rest in peace to you, Big George Foreman. So long, everybody.